Good afternoon, Mayor Odekirk and council members. We appreciate the opportunity to come back. As you recall, we met with you all May 10th and 11th to elicit feedback on several scenarios that we had at the time. We took your feedback very seriously and have now come up with 5 new scenarios, and Andrea Keeney with me is going to take you through the PowerPoint slide.
Hi, Mayor and council members. Nice to see you all again. I believe all of you have a PowerPoint presentation in front of you, and I will walk you through this. As Peter mentioned at our meeting about 2 weeks ago, we received feedback from you all, and so after that meeting, we put together 5 new scenarios. Some of these scenarios you've seen before, but there are some modifications, and then there are some new scenarios as well. So we will skip to, here we go, the first slide. You all are familiar with this. This is an existing site plan that's there currently with 356 units, 7 buildings, and a community center as well. And this is more just for reference. The first scenario we're presenting is 319 units. So essentially what we're doing here is removing buildings F and G. When we did the walkthrough, I think everyone thought those buildings are in pretty bad condition and should come down. So as part of this, we'll be retaining all the remaining buildings, demolishing F and G, and then that leaves us with 319 units. Those 319 units would continue to be operated as 100% project-based voucher units. We'd be removing 37 of the existing units or 2 buildings, and then demolition of about $275,000 would be paid for by operations. As you all know, there's a combination of studios, 1s, 2s, and 3-bedroom units. The city purchase price of about $11.4 million, if we switch to the next slide, shows that it has the ability to be paid back in 17 years. So it's about $716,000 from cash flow annually, operating it as is with the 319 units, which takes us to the year 2034 when it's paid back, which is 17 years. The next scenario is the same pretty much layout. It's the existing 319 units, again, demolishing F and G. The difference in this scenario is that we're adding back legal fees. So we've been told that the city had an estimated legal expense of about $10 million from the condemnation proceedings. So a total kind of purchase price / legal fees of about $21.5 million. So if we're to operate the building the buildings as is, we'd be able to pay that amount back in 30 years. I think a lot of you had questions about the current condition of these buildings, in addition to buildings F and G. So we have a replacement reserve with HUD right now. It's about, I believe, $2.5 to $2.8 million. We could potentially tap into that money to do the capital repairs that are needed. As I think we mentioned all of you at our individual meetings, we are in the process right now of putting together a list of capital repairs. Those capital repairs, kind of a summary of all of those amounts, will be provided to you all by the 15th of this month. So those are going to be the big ticket items that need to be addressed now. The the replacement reserve also is funded monthly or annually through operations. So once we take some of that money to do the capital repairs, over time, money will be going into building up that reserve as well. So flipping to the next page here, I think I mentioned this payback is in 30 years. So it's the $21.47 million, again, including legal fees. So operating this as is for 30 years. The next page, scenario 3, shows 177 units. So this scenario, we have demolished 4 of the buildings. So we're retaining 3 of the 7 residential buildings. In addition, we would be retaining the community center, which is labeled as E on this. So 177 units would be operated with the current unit configurations. We would do a mod rehab on all of these buildings. So the estimated cost of construction for that is about $75 a square foot. The remaining, all of the units, 177 units, would continue to be operated with 100%, as 100% project-based voucher units. The unit configurations will not change in the buildings that are retained. So it will still be studio 1, 2, and 3 bedroom units. And the city purchase price will be paid through the operations and capital budget. And that's estimated to be paid back by 2024. Now, 2024 is assuming that we're able to get financing from IDA to do this project, first off in 2021 and second in 2024. So we believe that there is about a 3-year time frame that it takes to get in their pipeline, kind of get the approval to move forward with the project. So if you, page 11 shows the first subphase of development. So the first subphase, we would anticipate doing buildings C and D, which is the one that's on the southern end of the site, and then also the one that's on Broadway, kind of a standalone building. And so that total development cost, doing a mod rehab for that, is about $20 million. There's a financing gap that we're showing here of about $400,000. Now there's ways to fill that gap. We could look potentially to the city to include CDBG funds. We have not included this on any of the scenarios, but I do know that there's an allocation that the city receives each year. I mean, I think 400,000 is something that we could figure out how to fill. That's the first subphase of development. The second subphase, which is on page 12, shows 71 units. This would be solely doing building A. And there's a gap here of about 2.4 million. So a combined gap on these two subphases, while they'll be done separately, we're kind of looking at them as one overall project at the bottom of the spreadsheet. $34.8 million for redevelopment of a scenario of this sort, and then a funding gap of 2.7 million. So the other ways to fill that gap, we have home funds included in here on both subphase of about $1.5 million. And speaking with IDA, the Illinois Housing Development Authority, last week, they thought that that would be a conservative amount to include in our budget. We could potentially go up to $2 million on both subphases. So that would be another $1 million that we would have that would reduce this 2.7. The other, again, as we mentioned before, are CDBG funds from the city if they would want to allocate a portion of their annual amount that they receive, and or looking at reducing the amount of the acquisition payback. The next scenario 4, it is going to be difficult to finance, but it was asked by some of you. I think there was some concern about the existing unit configurations at the buildings. And so what we did on this scenario is we looked at retaining the buildings, but basically doing a gut rehab as opposed to a mod rehab. This would be about $200 a square foot for construction costs, but it would change the unit configurations. So we're estimating that all of the units would increase by about 20% in size. We believe that we would still retain studios 1, 2, and 3 bedroom units, but again, the units would be a little bit larger. This is the same thing. City would be paid back by 2024, pending IDA financing. So walking through this. The first subphase, we have a $5.5 million gap. That's going to be a difficult gap to fill unless the city were willing to look at kind of eliminating the acquisition amount. But that's one way to do it. Again, CDBG funds as well, and potentially increasing the home funds to $2 million. But this is going to be difficult to do. The next subphase also has a gap of about 4.5 million, so a total gap on the 2 subphases of $10 million. Essentially, that's the city's acquisition price. Yes, I see all of your faces looking at me. Okay, and the final scenario, this is, Councilwoman Quillman, this is basically a scenario we wanted to run for you because I know that you have expressed interest and having the units all demolished, replacing them with townhomes. I think you had referred to Water's Edge on a couple of occasions. I did have the opportunity to speak with John Chow because I think you wanted us to look into potential capital funds. So typically when you work with a housing authority, there are 2 things that a housing authority can provide. They can provide subsidies, rent subsidies, and they can provide capital funds. We have rent subsidies on all of these units that we're never gonna get kind of a higher rent subsidy than what we're receiving from HUD right now. So that's not something that we would be going to the Joliet Housing Authority for. The second thing is potentially capital funds. CHA, when we work in the city, does provide us with capital funds on all of our deals. Unfortunately, the Joliet Housing Authority, per John Chow, does not have capital funds that they could give to a project of this size or at all. I think they typically do their own developments. Even if they were to be involved with subsidies, they would look for a percentage interest in the partnership, which is something that we typically don't do with the housing authorities, although I think that that's kind of their standard means of operating. But there's not an ability to have capital funds here, so we just wanted to get back to you about
Well,
that.
thank you for looking into it. It was a thought, and if you don't explore it, people would ask.
We want to explore, and I will tell you, we explore every source possible.
Well, thank you for doing that.
Yes, so it was nice to talk to him. So we based this scenario kind of off the same unit square footages that Water's Edge had. So that's 1,200 square feet for a 2-bedroom unit, 1,500 square feet for a 3-bedroom unit. And I do want to point out the site plan that's up here, this was done back in 2014 by Land and Bone Baker. This is not an actual site plan, it's just a representative site plan so that people can kind of see what the vision would be. So walking through this, we would retain 115, or not retain, we would build 115 new construction townhome style units. Those would all be project-based voucher units, and again, a combination of 2 and 3 bedroom units. Construction costs would be similar to a gut rehab, about $200 a square foot. The city purchase price would be paid through both operations and the capital budget, and there would be one phase of redevelopment. So everything would be taken down at once and then constructed new at the same time. This is where we end up on a project of this sort. So there's a gap here of about $24 million. I think some people might be thinking, why is the gap so high? We are doing a townhome development in the city of Chicago right now. The big difference between something like this and the project that we're doing is A, we have the ability to tap into capital dollars from the housing authority, which we don't have the ability to do here. B, there's not an acquisition price that's has to be paid to the Chicago Housing Authority to do a townhome style deal that we're doing right now. So this just makes it all the more difficult with the acquisition and paying it back. Basically, what we're saying is a project of this type couldn't be done here unless the city was willing to walk away from getting repaid its $11.4 million, and we could find some additional money. The final page that we have is a summary similar to when we presented to you all back in 2015. It kind of walks through A, what the scenario is, moving over to the right, to the next column, the total number of units. And again, all of these retain the minimum of 115 units that's required by HUD. The total project costs, as you'll see in scenario 1 and 2, both of those do not necessarily have project costs. Instead, they have capital repairs that will be paid for by the replacement reserve, the funding gap, and then the final column is the estimated city payback year. I think, no. The only scenario that includes legal fees is scenario 2, and that's where we operate it as is. Including an additional 10 million on any of these other redevelopment scenarios will just further increase the gap. It will make it next to impossible to do those, even though I think scenario 4 and 5 are gonna be very difficult to begin with. So what are we looking for from council? I think as all of you know, we have to present to HUD in September of this year a redevelopment plan that we envision. And so in order to get there, we need to host some community meetings with residents and also from the broader community. And then we need to re-engage our architect to kind of come up with some plans or elaborate on the plans that we have here. In addition to kind of picking through our numbers to make sure that we're confident that these numbers are accurate, but we always go back with a fine-tooth comb and go through all of our numbers. So it would be helpful to get feedback on these scenarios, and I think we had talked to David a little bit about this, kind of narrowing this down to 2 to 3 scenarios. 2 would probably be preferable so that we can go out and present those and have a feeling of, or know that council is behind those scenarios. Any questions?
Let me just add to that. And I just want to clarify, the public input phase is critical. And as we've talked, and I think even in some of these small group meetings, inevitably we could be asked questions, well, what does the council think about that? Or what does my council member, if my district, think about that? So the one question is, does the council want to, say anything about any of the 5, or, give maybe more preference to a short list of 2 or 3, which could be conveyed to the people at the public meetings. It doesn't mean that you have to. You could also let all 5 go, but we all know sometimes the more options you have, the more difficult it is for people to weigh in. And really, because the ultimate objective of the public input phase is bring information back to you as one of the 2 parties that have to recommend the redevelopment plan back to HUD. So prior to September, we'll be back here with input from the public, and then Holsten as one partner, the city of Joliet, and the governing board is the other, will have to take a vote and say, which of these scenarios do you want to vote on sending back to HUD? So, this is a time really to give some of your preference. Do you want to kind of narrow it? Give any kind of input that Holsten can convey in these public meetings, or leave it at the 5? So we're looking for you to guidance and direction as we begin, that public outreach phase of this particular project.
David, I'd just like to add scenario 5, given the funding gap here, I don't even think that's a worthwhile scenario to present to the greater public.
Excuse me.
Oh, sure.
We need to present that one. I was gonna mention that should be number 1 on the presentation, and I'll tell you why.
Oh, please.
When this started years ago, it was under the impression, and my impression also, that once we got hold of this, all those buildings would be demolished.
Okay.
And so that's been a question that's been asked over and over and over again. And now over the years, the whole concept has changed. So this question will be asked. So if you start off with this and saying, this is why we can't do this now at this point.
With showing the 25 million, yes.
You have to present that, because that's what people were told. And that's what folks are expecting after they found out that we won the case.
That makes sense.
Sure, we can do that.
Yeah, I don't disagree, and I think, I'll be very blunt. It's about time the city of Joliet start telling the truth about this, because that was not the case for the first 4 years I was on the city council. You're right. There's talk about marina and sailboats on a shipping canal. So I think it's time we get realistic, and I think Councilman, I agree with you. Let's put the truth out there.
Thank you.
Okay.
Mayor,
Yes.
for my input,
Yeah.
one of 9 members, they all should include the 10 million. It's really important that the city be made whole.
Okay.
And we should, moving forward, refer to the $15.065 million price tag, because the fact that we used pent-up CDBG money that was withheld by the federal government from us,
Okay.
that's no different than, I think everybody up here would really want to scalp me if I said the $3 million that we collect on motor fuel tax, we're not going to spread it around the city and help all the city. We're going to do Councilman Hugg's one subdivision with that $3 million. They would not stand for that. They said, no, you need to spread that $3 million across the city.
Okay.
We need to be made completely whole. So the entire city.
The 3.4. I think we need to be upfront with HUD about that, and let them know that it's the city's intent to be paid back, because I do know that they have certain, I don't know how they would
Right, that
feel
would be
about that.
incumbent on our staff to take those refunded funds
Yeah.
and apply them according to the regulations under the CDBG program.
Assuming, yeah.
Which they would do, which would meet all the guidelines. But they would do it throughout the city and not just in the 6-block area.
Okay. We are, and just so all of you know, we're trying to set up a meeting with HUD to talk about some other projects that we're doing, but also to bring this up to look, we're trying to look to them, what exactly do they want us to be presenting them with come September? How detailed of a plan does it have to be? And I think, if you don't mind, we would like to bring up the fact that The city is looking for 15 million to be returned, and also 3.4 of that would be the money, the CDBG money that was used to pay down, because I know that there was talk about that for about
Right, and
6
then
to
I'm sure at
7
that
years.
point, HUD would want to track that as a city.
Right.
We use that money by reassigning it, but you
Yeah.
understand what I'm saying, reassigning it in all 64 square miles.
Yes, I understand what you're saying. I just want to make sure it's allowed by
And
HUD,
then
but
the other
yes,
question is, you met the requirement under the consent decree for 115 units minimum.
yes.
There also, if I remember, now I'm going off memory, we go back a couple of years, there was part of the consent decree that we had to use reasonable due diligence to assist those being displaced, should they want to stay in Joliet.
Yeah.
What's the cost of doing that?
So you're asking about relocation?
Counseling
For
and
the first-
relocation is what they call
Relocation
it.
is included in all of our capital budgets. These vouchers are they're portable vouchers, so they can take the vouchers and go elsewhere to the extent that we demolish these units. Peter, you read up on the relocation details in there. I mean, what we've included in here is, there's not a rent differential, but what would be included is moving expenses, utility hookups, things of that sort, packing expenses. So we have estimated in all of these scenarios about $3,500 per family.
And how accurate, confident do you feel in these estimates? As a member of the Public Service Committee, we're very familiar with change orders, aren't we?
So.
You know,
All of these estimates are based off of site plans. They're not based off of architectural drawings. Our general contractors spend months going through any of the drawings that we have in order to price them accurately. What we've included here, the $200 per square foot, we're confident in that. I can't foresee what's gonna happen in the construction industry. There are union wage increases every year. There's sometimes, like right now, lumber is very expensive, steel sometimes spikes. I have no way of knowing that. I'm comfortable as an estimated $200 a square foot, but it could go up until we have actual drawings.
$75 square foot scenario.
The 75 mod rehab, yes, totally. I mean, that might be, and I should say what a mod rehab is. A mod rehab is not going in and fixing all of the mechanicals. A mod rehab is basically going in and doing more aesthetic work throughout, changing out kitchens, tiles in kitchens, tiles in bathrooms, things of that sort. But it's not new appliances.
Everything short of demolishing walls.
Correct, but it's more an aesthetic fix. It's not changing everything out in the building.
So it's essentially new appliances, paint on the walls, and new flooring.
Yeah, but if there's,
Flooring, and
if
if
there's some infrastructure that needs to be replaced, that's in there, but not 100% replacement.
And we should know more too, once these capital repairs are outlined by the 15th, as to exactly what would need to be done.
The other thing I want to mention is we'd like to bid this locally to local general contractors, because I think we could get a better deal than if we pull someone out of Chicago.
Yeah. And for the first two scenarios. Anything that involves Ida is Davis-Bacon, and yes.
I have a question.
Sure.
Regarding the estimated payback year that you have listed.
Yeah.
For 3 and 4 and 5, you have a short payback, 2024.
Yeah.
If I understand right, that's just simply when we would get financing. So the city would pay back through the financing, there'd still be a 30-year commitment then.
No. So the way these scenarios work is that during the period prior to redevelopment, the city is going to be paid down an estimated about $716,000 a year through operations. At financial closing, we have a portion of whatever is remaining from the acquisition amount included in our capital budget. That would be funded at financial closing. So that full amount, there's going to be a portion that would be funded on the first subphase. Let's take, for example, scenario 3. The first subphase that would potentially close in 2021, there would be an amount included in there in the capital budget. So that would be funded at 2021. Then we would still have some remaining buildings that we would still be operating. So that 716 would go down by however many units we reduced or we demolished or rehabbed. And then those would continue paying for operations from 2021, 2022, 2023, and then at financial closing in 2024, the city would be paid in full through the capital budget, the second subphase capital budget.
Right, and then I thought you had financing attached with a 6.5% interest rate. Did I read that correctly?
Correct, so that's a standard, first mortgage, a perm loan essentially.
It's a 30-year loan.
It's a 30-year loan that's paid back through the redeveloped project. Correct.
And that covers the 34 million project costs.
Correct.
So.
A portion of
I guess
that,
what I'm
yes.
saying is, for the paybacks for 1 and 2,
Mm-hmm.
we could do the same thing. We could bond it out theoretically and pay back the bond with the rents we receive. We could be made whole within a matter of months. Correct, David?
Well, you'd also have to have the revenue being generated by the project to pay off the debt service. Would you?
Yeah.
You're
Would
right,
you-
yeah, you could, we could go somewhere and, get a loan based on the cash flow, and then take the city out, and then the project pays back a different lender.
Okay. Thank you.
Yeah.
Mayor?
Yes.
And following up on this question, because I do remember at the time that this council in a majority vote passed, the purchase and ownership of it, that there was a informal commitment to bonding. I remember, I know what you're referring to. There was a discussion up here. So would that have to be a private bond versus a municipal bond?
Or you're probably talking about a tax exempt bond or a taxable bond, and I'm not sure on that. We'd have to consult bond counsel as
No,
to.
I mean, we'd have to, I don't know about
I don't know
FHA.
if FHA would do it, based on the present condition, but we could definitely, we could find a fixed rate lender somewhere.
Yeah,
To take out.
I just didn't want, because the dates could be confusing. They aren't necessarily hard dates, there's another way to do it, if we were to choose that option.
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah, we could certainly look at getting the city out, and then we would just, instead of paying the city every month, we'd pay somebody else. Yeah.
Any other questions, comments?
Well, then the city would still be 50% of the partnership, right?
The city, you're in two positions. You're 50% partner and you're a lender. You lose the lending part, you stay as partner, whatever.
So worst case scenario down the road with the 6.5% for say 5 million, right? If the revenues came up short for some reason, if they didn't meet expectations, who would be responsible for that shortfall?
The project.
The partners of the LLC?
We would try and make that debt not recourse. So the city and Holsten would not be on the hook. The project would be on the hook.
Making money here.
So that's normally, we normally do not recourse loans.
And that means what? That
Just-
somebody would take the building away from the
Yeah, the
partnership?
lender would take the property away, worst case.
Of course. So kind of picking up on what Mayor Odekirk had said, and scenario 3 kind of seems appealing. I would assume what's going to happen here, we would get paid back through operations, get paid back in 2024, and then the entity, the LLC, would have non-recourse debt to the tune of about $35 million, correct?
Yeah, I mean,
Through capital costs and all
That's
that sort of.
the total development cost is 34 million. Some
Yeah.
of those are grants and LIHTC
So the
equity.
entity, the LLC, would have a certain amount of debt
Correct.
in there.
Correct.
Which, and you're saying would.
It's
you'd
not the
probably
full
be
34.
Non-recourse debt.
Yeah, it's typically, in these types of deals, especially with the Section 8 rents, that's a pretty much guaranteed income stream, so it would be very reasonable to attract non-recourse debt.
Okay, so what if we,
Doesn't pay back
picking up
our
on what
legal
Mayor
fees.
Odekirk said, what if we
Right,
use,
they're gone,
I never
you know.
thought about this until now, but what if we took scenario 1, at closing, took the non-recourse debt, okay, paid back the city, now you've got the non-recourse debt, and use that operating income to do all the renovations, and then maybe get to that scenario 3. Does that make sense?
We could start with scenario 1, and, with the voucher income, we could
Yeah.
attract non-recourse debt.
Right.
As much as possible.
So then instead of paying back the city, you're paying back the non-recourse, the debt, right? And,
Yes.
yeah, and going through your renovation and reducing the
using our
density and.
reserves for renovation.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's correct.
Okay.
Yeah, but there's definitely a possibility of picking up a fixed rate lender
Yeah.
and getting the city out.
Right.
We get 21
But yet still accomplishing everything in, say, scenario 3, or, that you want to.
Yes.
20, we'd
I
have
mean,
to,
I'm not looking for an answer right now, I'm just kind of looking.
but that,
we're
we
just
understand the concept.
talking here.
Yes.
Yeah.
it's
okay.
actually,
Thank you.
it's 25 million.
Yeah. I don't know
Because
if we can get that
we're,
out.
if we're adding,
Get that out right away. But we can look at it.
yeah.
Or maybe you get 75%, or,
I'm pretty
Yeah.
sure we can get the purchase price out, perhaps the 15 million.
yeah.
The 10 may have to be on a payment
Oh,
plan.
I wasn't referring to the 10, actually, I was just referring to the 15.
15,
Yeah.
okay.
Any other questions, comments?
I just want to be clear, you made a statement that HUD would be looking for a vision of a project, so it's for September, so it doesn't have to be in concrete, signed, sealed, delivered. This is the scenario that we're going with in September. They're just looking for some type of plan.
Yeah, and that's why we're trying to set up a meeting with them to get clarification on that.
We don't know the answer to your question, but we're trying to get a meeting with HUD so that we can pin them down as to what exactly constitutes a development plan in your eyes.
Well, thank you.
you.
Mayor.
Follow-up, are there gonna be meetings scheduled with the public?
Well, if I can, I just want to go back to one of the requests they had. I guess the default direction of the council could be, if you don't want to make any motion, would be for Holsten to go back and solicit public input on all 5 scenarios. That really doesn't take anything for you. That could be the default if you're maybe undecided. The other option or two could be do something less than 5 scenarios. And we could, if you just want to go with the default and say, go out, give public comment on these, fine, do so. If you want, we could come back, or we could either tonight or in 2 weeks, see if there is a desire, the majority, to consider something less than the 5, then you could take action tonight or maybe in 2 weeks. So again, I just throw that out and see if the council wants them to proceed with all 5 at this time, or would you like to consider narrowing that either tonight or in 2 weeks?
David, I would love to hear the public comment. I would love for that to come back
On all 5?
on all 5.
Okay.
And then go from there.
Okay.
That would be me.
Is that a general consensus of the council, move with all 5, get public input on that?
Question. When you say public input, are you going to have neighborhood meetings? Are you going to have meetings here at the council? How are you going to do that?
Good question. Why
Yeah,
don't you go
so at our meetings with council members, we walked away thinking that we would host probably 1 to 2 meetings on site with residents, and then have also individual meetings with some of the community groups that were mentioned to us. I don't remember the name. I don't have the names of all of them in front of
The
me. but I
neighborhood
think St. John-
associations
St. John's-
over in that area. Yeah.
I think
Correct.
There's several.
Yeah, I think there were 3 to 5 that we had written down that we wanted to meet with.
Right.
I suspect then there would likely be a larger meeting open to the community as well.
So they have monthly neighborhood meetings. Why don't you go to the neighborhood meetings? Because those are the 5 stakeholders or 6 stakeholders that live around that area.
Yeah.
And I know that they've been really wanting to know what's going on and put their input in as well. And then if you, an on-site meeting, I don't know, because where would you park? There's no parking.
So the
A lot
on-site,
of people would be there, a lot of people would be
Right.
curious unless you're gonna have like an open house day.
yeah, I think the on-site meetings would be solely for residents, but then we could do a larger one at the, and I always say this wrong, the Billy, is it?
Mock or Bicentennial Park.
Yes, perhaps do that. We just need to take a look at our calendar and make sure that we have to be able to fit all these meetings in, plus then re-engage, depending on what HUD says, re-engage with our architects, to have them draw up some of this stuff.
There's
that we
one
can-
Wednesday night, the Cunningham meeting, and the president's sitting back there.
Yeah,
John
can
Sheridan.
someone, David, maybe you could help us out with that in
Sure.
getting the
That
contact
would-
information for these various groups
Yeah.
so that we could reach out directly?
Yeah,
That would be
we'll
helpful.
definitely.
If you're time constrained, Wednesday night is the first one, 6:30, Cunningham District.
And I also remind, we were also
Trying to help you out here.
Yes, yes. We will see. Yes, thank you.
We were also thinking of having maybe one public meeting where we'd be televised.
Yeah.
So that we could put that on the city's website, so if someone couldn't make one of these meetings, they could watch it.
That as well.
And then send in, written comments to Holsten and the city so that we could get that, because, so yes, we'll be doing that as well, so.
Okay. So after,
And keep in mind, I think during this public education phase, probably in August,
Yeah.
you'll be coming back to the council
Yeah.
with all this input, and that'll be the month when we'll really need to narrow down one scenario.
Correct.
that Both Holsten and the city council wants to recommend to be sent to HUD to meet that September guideline. So that's ultimately where a vote will have to be taken.
Man, one quick question here too. If we were to pursue and successfully, because you did use the term probably, or we think, right, on non-recourse debt, you know, outside debt, what's gonna cover the $2.8 million funding gap that you projected? Even under the non-recourse debt scenario?
We'd have to find a way to fill that from something. I mean, we would max out on our hard debt that the project can handle, and then the rest, we gotta find sources for, because it's.
Yeah, the 2.8 million, I mean, a couple of ways I had mentioned that when we spoke with the head of multifamily over at IDA, they said potentially, you know, for a project of this size, they could go up to $2 million for home funds as opposed to the 1.5 million we're showing there. So that's a total of $1 million, so it reduces that down to 1.7. We can look, I mean, we've explored most of the sources, but we'd have to look at interest rates because obviously that impacts the size of your, you know, your first mortgage. So there's a variety of things we could look to.
And the
to fill that.
The 2.7 goes up by the CDBG, you know, from 11 to 15, right? Because you want 15.
Right, that was my
Right.
other question.
That adds to the 2.7.
Okay, and then my other question was, am I oversimplifying the math? That you said the only scenario is two that gives us back, makes us really completely whole with $10 million being paid back for our investment through.
Correct.
Yeah,
Could we
otherwise-
add roughly 13 years to each of the scenarios if we expect to pay that $10 million? Is that 13-year differential basically to pay back the extra $10 million?
Well, if you're operating it as is, I mean, we're gonna have to have the debt paid off if that additional 10 million, if,
I think the as-is scenario is gonna have the richest cash flow.
Right.
And the most likelihood of getting the quickest way to pay back the debt.
So the first two scenarios would be 13 years roughly extra. The other ones could be longer.
Yes.
Because you're reducing the number of
Reducing
units.
the number of units, cash flow's lower.
Could be 15, could be 18 years additional. Okay, thank you.
Set?
Thank you.
thank you.